So I'm in Puerto Rico and I did the Bacardi mixology rum class, and you need to go.
If you care about Puerto Rico, do not go to the Bacardi rum factory because it's hardly Puerto Rican anymore. First off. Second off, it's hardly a rum factory anymore either because they've been outsourcing all of those jobs to the Dominican Republic so they can get away with their shitty labor practices. And you can trust me because I'll admit that I've been there because my family really wanted to go and it was the low light of our trip to Puerto Rico. And I know you weren't actually learning anything at that little exhibit that they call a museum because they completely whitewashed their history, including their legacy of slave labor, as well as funding right-wing terrorist organizations that killed people. They bombed a plane. Like, I get it. Everything from that time was founded on slave labor, but y'all need to cut a check because it wasn't just horrible and egregious and abusive and murderous. You stole, and there are communities who suffer to this day because of that theft. And you are growing exponentially to this day because you got an unfair advantage. So it's time to cut a check. But instead of equity, Bacardi went to the Dominican Republic where there are even more descendants of African slaves to exploit them for even less than they were paying people in Puerto Rico. But let's get to the terrorism because I want to give Bacardi's marketing team a nightmare today. Bacardi became so rich because they started with slave plantations in Cuba, which was the capital of sugar production in the whole world. You need sugar to make rum. And the slave plantations in Cuba were so infamously evil to their slaves that the plantation owners in the United States would threaten their slaves and say that they would send them to Cuba if they continued to act up. So spare me your fucking pity when the Cuban Revolution comes around and all of these giant plantations that were not even owned by Cubans. Mind you, it was like Spaniards and Americans owning most of that rural land in Cuba. Spare me your fucking pity when they got expropriated. Boo fucking who? Your former slave plantation was given to the freed slaves who work on it? What's the problem? Now, there were a lot of problems with the Cuban Revolution. I'm in the LGBT community, and they were not so nice in the LGBT community during that time. Mind you, Cuba is probably now the most accepting place for the LGBT community in all of the Americas. Basically, yes, there were a lot of human rights issues in Cuba, but funding a far-right extremist terrorist group to go and bomb places and kill people in Cuba so that you could get your property back, your plantation. How exactly does bombing people help develop human rights? And mind you, they didn't have human rights before the revolution. It was a brutal US-backed dictatorship. And we didn't have human rights in the United States. If you were black, we still had segregation. Retrospect is quite the luxury. It's so easy to look back and say, why weren't those Cuban revolutionaries being more peaceful and diplomatic when they were not given the opportunity to learn to read? So please excuse them when they were fighting for their lives, their sovereignty, and their dignity, and they were a little bit too violent, defending themselves from violence. So after all those former slave plantations got expropriated, all of the land was given to the freed slaves who actually worked it. The Bacardi family said, we got plenty of time and plenty of money from our slave plantations because they just started shoveling the pesos to these far-right extremist terrorist groups to go bomb everybody. Like Luis Posada Carriles, who was behind the Cubana Flight 455 bombing that killed 73 people. This Bacardi-backed terrorist was targeting the Cuban fencing team who had just won a gold championship medal. And of course, that guy got to live a full, free, happy life in the United States after that blatant act of terrorism. Also, in 2010, Bacardi got fined for violating the Clean Water Act in Puerto Rico. So they're polluting the land too. Also, the mojito that they gave me in the beginning of the tour tasted like fresh cut grass. Cheap rum and fresh cut grass. It's supposed to taste like mint. It's supposed to be light and minty and delightful. No, it tasted like grass and pesticides. I originally wanted to be like, oh, no hate to this creator, get your little Bacardi bag. But honestly, it's not that hard to be better. I make travel content too, and when I travel, I look for more authentic experiences. Not only is it the right thing to do to promote places that are owned by the people who actually live there, but it makes better content. Like, that guy's really talented. I can tell he didn't do that much research, but he's making me want to go back to Puerto Rico too. Like, he's good at what he does. But like, talk to Puerto Ricans. When I went to Puerto Rico, I was asking all my Puerto Rican friends, where do I go? What businesses do I support? And I had an incredible, unique experience doing a road trip around the whole island, seeing lots of natural beauty, going to small towns, eating a lot of incredible food because I did so. And if you don't have any Puerto Rican friends, I'm sorry. That sounds horrible. But, you know, ask your followers, ask TikTok, go look online. When you see Bacardi Rum Factory Tour, it should scream corporate, 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 stay away, stay away. Whack as fuck, whack as fuck. Like, I was humiliated to be there riding around that little buggy with a bunch of drunk, obnoxious, non-Hispanic Americans in a sugar plantation that no longer grows any sugar because the corporation who owns it is so horrible and the rum sucked. But I'm not just a hater, I'm also a creator, so I will do this creator's job and give you a list of things to do in San Juan that actually support Puerto Ricans. My first suggestion is to get out of Old San Juan. It's a fun, touristy area. A lot of it is owned by rich real estate people though. So after you go see the charm and the history, you can take a ferry from Old San Juan to the other side of the bay for like $1 or something really, really cheap. It barely costs anything because it's subsidized for the Puerto Rican commuters. On that note, if you go during rush hour, be prepared to wait for the next one because Puerto Rican commuters get priority on this ferry. That ferry ride might be normal to the residents of San Juan, but I found it to be really beautiful to get such a big view of the bay and the city and all of the history. And when you get to the other side, there are a lot more Puerto Rican owned businesses. Now these are the places my Puerto Rican friend told me to shout out. He told me Finca Neo Jibaro. It's a big tobacco farm where they grow, dry, and process all the cigars themselves. They have an artisan pizza shop and it's ran by his good friend's family. It's really beautiful. They have passion fruit trees and amazing drinks, and it's on your way to visiting El Yunque National Park, Puerto Rico's biggest rainforest. He also recommended Placido de Rio Piedras, which is a whole street of locally owned stuff that's super good. And when you go there, go to Selena Pizzeria. It's woman owned and they built it from scratch. And also Piñones has a lot of Afro PR businesses and food like Alcapuria. And if you wanted to go to the Bacardi rum tour to get fucked up, that is just not the place. There are so many places to party in San Juan that aren't that. It's not even cheap.